So I guess I should get started. Is that okay, Lily?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. I am beyond honored to have the opportunity to address my beloved Society of Counseling Psychology, as we know, referred to as SCP or Division 17, whatever title you prefer. SCP has been a source of connections and community for me for nearly 40 years, which is a scary thought. I would like to thank each and every one of you. You've been such a tremendous source of support through this very challenging past year. Support for me, for SCP, for our clients, for our students, and for our communities around the globe. I truly am always so very proud to be a counseling psychologist. At the beginning of each SCP presidential term, the new president is asked to envision a theme for their year of leadership. My theme is entitled, "It Takes a Village, Engaging with Solidarity in Practice, Dismantling Anti-Black Racism, and Advocacy, Education, and Big Ideas." This theme emerged from the confluence of 4 threads, as well as maybe an overly ambitious agenda in my mind. My commitment to the practice of counseling psychology, my involvement in SCP for decades, during which many practitioners disengaged from Division 17, the SCP strategic plan, and the unprecedented events and awakenings over the last few years. The first thread is my passion for practice, which many of you know, and this stems from my work in college counseling centers, first as a trainee, then as a psychologist, and then as a director, followed by a full-time independent practice for the last few decades. I'm fortunate to practice as a counseling psychologist in a community where I have deep roots and a strong sense of connection, and I have the opportunity to work with wonderful clients, many of whom, unfortunately, are survivors of abuse and torture. The second thread leading to my theme is my active engagement with SCP and the privilege of seeing how our division has changed and evolved over the years. When I first joined Division 17, it was mainly an academic-focused division for those in the academy. But over the years, as counseling psychologists have increasingly moved into practice settings and we needed a stronger presence in SCP. However, we also saw that practitioners were leaving, and this was distressing. So we've done our best to work to re-engage practitioners this year. I was fortunate to have stayed in SCP and have held a variety of leadership positions, both within the division and within counseling psychology. And I wanted to engage all of our members, including practitioners, in SCP and our practice specialty of counseling psychology. After working with the American Board of Counseling Psychology, which, as you know, board certifies counseling psychologists, I was led to run for president of SCP. All of this helped to shape, in part, together, helped to shape my presidential theme to offer resources and a home for counseling psychology practitioners within our division. The third thread, our SCP strategic plan, was developed over the last 4 years with strong input from membership to move our organization forward in numerous ways. 2 of the major areas of focus that emerged were practice and member engagement, in addition to advocacy, education, and organizational effectiveness. The development of this strategic plan, which began in 2017 and included a whole bunch of us, was intended to guide but not limit our work from 2019 to 2024. We have been able to truly dive into this plan and bring much of it to fruition. My initiatives were created to further help bring this plan to life and engage our members at all career stages. The passion and collaboration of our members are such a gift, and I believe that we can help change the world in which we live through our work. The final thread includes the unprecedented events of 2020 and 2021, which of course could fill many pages, but were all important in moving us toward the change our society so desperately needs. Looking beyond the surface is what we do on a daily basis as counseling psychologists. But when do we do that more deeply with our social norms? This pandemic of COVID-19 and racial awareness has pushed us to challenge those norms. Anti-Black racism and many other forms of racism exist, and they are everywhere we look. Thankfully, there has been a growing awareness of systemic and structural racism, which many have referred to as the racism pandemic. Our SCP members have risen to the challenge to engage in myriad ways at unprecedented levels through online discussions and dialogues, through commitment in SCP to explore and strengthen our focus on teaching and learning, and to move forward in our commitment to become an anti-racist organization. We learned that we could use our knowledge and commitment to liberation to expand our lenses, help our clients, and work to improve the world. A quote from President John F. Kennedy that I really took to heart as a child is, "If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" We can be the change. We have to be the change, and we need to address it now. Another factor in this year's events has been the loneliness and disconnect that many in our society have felt as a whole. Our villages have not just been separated, they've often been torn apart. Counseling psychology teaches us the importance of community, connections, and collaborations. Through the creativity of our division leaders and programs, I am humbled to see the many ways that we have created engagement and expanded our village connections to levels beyond our wildest dreams. The engagement has gone beyond the norm of connecting with our colleagues at convention and has expanded our vision and reach to be global. Our online continuing education workshops and discussions engaged numbers of attendees that we could not have previously imagined, by colleagues throughout the US and in countries from Ghana to Korea. Our programs were inclusive of students, ECPs, and mid and late career psychologists. I had the opportunity, which was amazing, to be part of a global panel on counseling psychology values that included representatives from 6 countries. And SCP is currently a part of a global research study on counseling psychology. And it's our intention to continue these collaborations. We've also learned that we can use telehealth platforms to serve clients who otherwise may not have been able to access us. So along with the challenges of a global pandemic, we've been able to thrive and grow as counseling psychologists in ways that we could not have imagined. So all of these led to my theme for the year. It takes a village, engaging in solidarity and practice, dismantling anti-Black racism, advocacy, education, and big ideas. I'm excited to share with you some of the ways that our engagement groups have been extraordinarily successful due to the vision and efforts of our leaders and participation of our members. The Engaging Practice Initiative, led by chairs Dr. Lisa Ferdinand, Batsare Vunzawabaya, and Chris Stoltz, offered 8 continuing education programs in collaboration with our Continuing Education Committee, chaired by Dr. Joe Hammer, as well as 9 discussion-based programs for practitioners. These programs focused on practice with marginalized communities and reached approximately 2,600 psychologists, students, and other colleagues. However, it's not the numbers that are important, but the topics that were discussed using a counseling psychology lens, and our students, scholars, and practitioners responded by joining in. We are working to solidify the structures that were developed this year so that such programs will continue to be offered by SCP on our new learning management system. The Dismantling Anti-Black Racism Initiative, led by chairs Dr. Jeanette Madkids, Abimbola Abulayan, Marcy Rowland, and Deja Fitzgerald, developed 2 programs offered in our Liberation Lounge at this APA convention for deeper discussion of systemic racism and white supremacy culture, allowing us to engage at a deeper level than could occur in workshops alone. The Engaging Advocacy Initiative, led by chairs Dr. Andres Consoli, Jennifer Taylor, and Ryan McDermott, in consultation with our VP for Diversity and Public Interest, Dr. Herman Cadenas, developed an amazing symposium on training and advocacy that was presented here at Virtual APA and will be available on the APA platform for 3 months and afterward on the SCP website and our YouTube channel. This way, we can continue to engage and train our students and colleagues in effective social justice advocacy skills. By the way, I would really recommend that program for those of you that teach. It would be a wonderful thing to share with your students. The Engaging Advocacy chairs are also creating a series called Ask the Advocate, a forthcoming resource that will soon be on the new SCP website. This will consist of short interviews about engaging in advocacies, and they are collaborating with the SCP Social Justice Advocacy website team in creating content. A lifelong learning and leadership initiative led by tri-chairs Dr. Ruth Fassinger, Bonju Huang, and Kimberly Howard will continue their work under Dr. Howard's Vice Presidency for Education and Training as they create leadership training modules, processes for a leadership pipeline within SCP, and create a social justice focused leadership vision as we work with our consultants. They have created a dynamic structure of leaders and have several programs that will be unfolding throughout this fall. The Big Ideas in Counseling Psychology initiative, led by tri-chairs Dr. Sharon Bowman, Carmen Cruz, and Marty Cooper, are creating webinars focusing on timely topics with luminaries and emerging leaders in our field. They are presenting 3 different webinars, with the first having to do during this convention. This Big Ideas APA webinar was entitled Big Ideas in Counseling Psychology, Uprooting Anti-Blackness. The moderator was Dr. Clady Davis III, and the presenters were Drs. Helen Neville, Janet Helms, Carlton Green, and Della Mosley. This program will continue to be available on the website for the next 3 months, and then will be available on the SCP website. And if you weren't there yesterday to see the program, I would strongly encourage you all to see it. It was overwhelmingly amazing. And we appreciate the ideas and the presentations of all the panelists. The Big Ideas tri-chairs have 2 additional programs to be offered this fall, one focusing on vocational psychology and one on the evolution of mental health systems on university campuses. So please stay tuned for more. We have a strong history of supporting and welcoming our students. We continue to engage these students and ECPs through our Leadership Collaborative, our student affiliates of 17 Group, SAS, as you all know, which has moved from a single campus model of leadership to a national model this year, and our new mentoring program initiated by our TCP editor, Brian Kim, and the TCP editorial board. This new program offers a year-long mentoring experience in which 18 advanced graduate students and ECPs are individually mentored and then participate in the manuscript review process for our flagship journal, thereby strengthening the engagement of emerging scholars in our research. Phenomenal is the only word that comes to my mind when I review the many activities that our members have created and engaged with this year. I am so incredibly grateful, reflecting on this past year and the many ways that our members have worked together to strengthen our field and create a stronger sense of community. the accomplishment that our division members have contributed to our society, to the field of psychology, and to our culture as a whole are humbling. And I'm so fortunate to be a member of this community. I would like to reflect specifically today on the practice of counseling psychology for a moment. Over the years, like many of us, I have found myself reflecting on what makes the practice of counseling psychology different from other areas of psychology, particularly of other areas in the practice of psychology. You probably have been asked that question many times, as I have been asked. And it finally came to me this year somehow. It took me a while, based on all the formal definitions we have learned, informed by my experience as a board-certified counseling psychologist, and based solidly on our training in person-environment interaction models. And this was my big insight. Our person-environment interaction models and prevention models provide the intellectual groundwork for the ways that counseling psychology differs from other psychological specialties in the ways that we practice. I'll say that again. I think that our person-environment interaction models and prevention models provide the intellectual groundwork for the ways that counseling psychology differs from other specialties in the way we practice. You see, our approach to treating clients in practice goes far beyond treating symptoms and far beyond categorizing DSM codes, because those don't fully incorporate the lived experience of our clients. Counseling psychologists don't just implement protocols for narrow symptoms or specific diagnoses, although we're able to do so when appropriate. Rather, we connect with and help individuals with lived experiences. It is these lived experiences that lead us to think and connect with clients. Incorporating the traumas, violence, oppression, and aggressions that they have experienced, and the challenges they have faced in work and relationship in the past and the present. It is our connection to our clients and their complex lived experiences that lead to our field's research in the area of the importance of work, the therapeutic alliance, identity development, and racial trauma. It is our work as counseling psychologists to not only practice with our heads, but with our hearts. The lived experience of our clients also leads to our commitment to social justice and prevention, to move beyond just treating the survivors of these experiences, but also to work to prevent others from experiencing such harm. Our colleague Bruce Wampold identified qualities and actions of effective therapists through a synthesis of his research and that of others that, for me, clarify and define how we think as practitioners in counseling psychology. And there are 5 themes. We use our interpersonal skills to accept, empathize with, and focus on the client, which allows clients to feel understood, trusting, and hopeful. We form working alliances with a broad range of clients, and this, of course, is based on collaborative, purposeful work on the part of both the therapist and the client. We help our clients in collaboratively developing an acceptable and adaptive explanation for their distress. We are willing to be wrong and adjust therapy if things aren't working. And we don't avoid difficult discussions or difficult dialogues in therapy, even when it involves distressing material, difficult experiences, or the relationship between ourselves and our clients. Of course, we are always aware of variables such as race, culture, ethnicity, nationality, spirituality, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, physical health, socioeconomic status, adoption status, and all aspects of the lived experience, as well as the impact of our own lived experience on our work. And our work is constantly informed and guided by our very strong sense of ethics and our knowledge of research, all while focusing on the client. I would say it's an incredibly complex and cognitively complex process. You know, years ago, my friend Pam, who's a clinical social worker, told me that she observed that I think differently than other psychologists she knew in the past. She said she had thought about it and she finally figured it out. I was a counseling psychologist, and my friend Pam was right. Counseling psychologists do practice differently than other psychologists and other mental health professionals. We help people with the distress that has emerged from their lived experiences, and we understand that these lived experiences are a key component to their healing. We practice with heart, and I believe this is what makes our work so much more meaningful, most importantly to our clients, but also to us in our own life's journey. I would also like very much to address how this year has been a transformative and awakening journey about issues that go back centuries. But this year, stemming from the murder of George Floyd and Daniel Prude, the injuries sustained by Jacob Blake, all resulting in the strengthening of the Black Lives Matter movement. These horrific episodes have led to opportunities for SCP to center BIPOC voices and experiences and work to dismantle anti-Black racism in myriad ways. We are now focusing on what we can learn and change for ourselves, our clients, our students, and our communities by learning about and dismantling anti-Black racism in our organization, our institutions, our communities, and in our lives. In many ways, the events of this year were totally predictable based on the history of our country, our academic traditions, our capitalistic society, and our beloved organization, the Society of Counseling Psychology. But in other ways, it seemed to come up quickly, and SCP has stepped forward into deeper work to dismantle anti-Black racism. For those of us of a certain age, our commitment to social justice and civil rights began early, as the actions and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other Black leaders of the 1960s called us to action to behave in non-racist and anti-racist ways. Our SCP leaders over the decades, including past presidents Rosie Phillips Davis, Melba Vasquez, William Parham, Janet Helms, and Sharon Bowman, have helped our organization to increase its awareness of both individual and systemic racism. I personally will never forget Rosie's presidential address in 2000, in which she reminded us of all the ways that counseling psychology struggled for inclusion in things like licensing laws, recognition in academic settings, and elsewhere. And yet it took 50 years to be inclusive enough to elect the first Black president of Division 17. Her message resonates still. When we are inclusive, everyone benefits, and we need to draw the circle bigger, because although exclusion is easier, inclusion is better. And we are all working to emphasize this even more at this point in history. Counseling psychologists have been identified with social justice for decades now. We are in debt to our BIPOC colleagues and white allies for their research, practice, supervision, and training related to social justice, including William Cross, SCP past President Janet Helms, Kevin Coakley, Helen Neville, Annalise Singh, and Della Mosley, to name but a few. Yet, and I can speak as an individual here, and perhaps this is true for some of my white colleagues as well, until more recently, I have to confess that I didn't fully grasp the limitations of my understanding of racism, which I viewed more through an individual lens. I used to think that individuals could be racist, for example, white supremacist individuals or organizations. I used to think that behavior could be racist, for example, in hiring practices, promotion and tenure decisions, but I still somehow thought the core of this was individual attitudes and beliefs. That is, part of an individual's lived experience rather than indicative of a system of racism. I don't think I'm alone among my white colleagues, and I know that I and many, many white psychologists are working to expand our knowledge and commitment to dismantle the racism in our system, deepening our understanding of white supremacy culture and the colonial structures that underlie them. This year has been a journey in grappling with systemic racism for our country, for our field, and for our beloved organization. The lens of systemic and structural racism challenges us all to move beyond non-racism to anti-racism in our structures and systems. And really, who better to move forward in this journey than the members of the Society of Counseling Psychology? For those who may not have followed the process this year, the SCP Executive Board voted to move forward with hiring a consultant group to assist us in our journey toward dismantling anti-Black racism and white supremacy culture in our organization. In many ways, counseling psychology is far ahead of many structures and organizations, and yet we have a long way to go. There are many ways of looking at dismantling systemic racism in organizations and beyond. These are issues that we'll be exploring this year within SCP in our work with each other and with the help of our consultants. Tracing the history of APA and SCP over the years is beyond the scope of this talk, but suffice to say that in many ways we have moved through some of the developmental stages in becoming an anti-racist organization, but we need to become even more stronger and more sophisticated in our commitment to this transformation. I am thrilled to have our consultant group, Jernigan and Associates, speak with us immediately following this address, well after a break. And I hope that all of you will stay to engage in this exciting and important conversation. Before closing, I would like to thank the leaders and members of each of the presidential engagement groups this year for their vision, their commitment, and their amazing success at engaging our members in our efforts to strengthen our field and our world. I would like to thank my colleagues on our SCP cabinet and executive board, from whom I have learned so much, and whose shared vision is creating a future for SCP that draws the circle even wider. I would like to thank our journal editors and editorial boards, our committee members, our project group members, and our students in ECP in the Leadership Collaborative, the Leadership Development Institute, and the TCP Mentoring Program. I would like to thank our Vice President for Communications, Dr. Valine Whitaker, and our Communications and Technology Board Chair, Dr. Carrie Wilkins-Yell, for their incredible work in moving forward toward making our new website and membership database a reality. Your visions and contributions strengthen our field and our community in ways that will play forward in connection with our members for decades. I would also like to thank our amazing AMC source team, led by Debbie Nolan, and I owe a great deal to Celeste Isako, with whom I could not have served in this role while in full-time independent practice. I am particularly grateful to SCP for allowing me the privilege of Celeste's participation in our work. Finally, I would like to thank my partner, Frank Wiley, who has been an incredible source of support for the last 44 years, and especially this year. I would like to thank my 3 children, Jordan, Justin, and Erica, and their partners and children, for enriching my life in ways that I can't even begin to describe. I would like to thank my dear friends who periodically took me away on vacations when I needed a break. And I would like to express a heartfelt gratitude to all those who came before me. That includes my Irish immigrant grandparents, my parents, that includes both my birth parents and my adoptive parents, my 9 siblings from both families, and my dear friends who go back to childhood, graduate school, and internship days. And of course, I would like to thank my mentors, both in research and in practice. I would like to thank each of you, my beloved fellow counseling psychologists, for the trust and enthusiasm with which you engaged in our journey this year. I am forever grateful. I'm hoping that the vision that we have created and the work that we have done this year will move forward in continuing to engage all of us and create an even stronger and more inclusive counseling psychology community. I'm hopeful that more practitioners will engage in the board certification process in our specialty of counseling psychology to make it even more vibrant and to be the best that each of us can be. I also hope that other practitioners will take this journey into SCP leadership. We need you. My hope for the future is that we continue to expand our village and work to change the world for better, knowing that we are also part of the larger good of our global community. It takes a village to create the change our society needs to move forward, and I invite all counseling psychologists to be a part of this forward momentum and to be part of a strong and forward-thinking society of counseling psychology. Thank you all so very much for your kindness and your generosity this year. And thank you for being a part of SCP. And please, please attend our discussion with our Dismantling Anti-Black Racism consultants in a few minutes. We are thrilled to have Dr. Miriam Jernigan, Carlton Green, join us for a year of deep reflection and change. Thank you.